I'm Robert Levine. I'm the editor of Trends magazine. But, of course, as everyone knows, the we the world, and the We campaign unites and amplifies the efforts of people, organizations, and global movements working for the common good. So if you haven't come onto our website before, please come on to we.net, learn about the organization, see the wonderful work we does in order to go from me to we, truly to make a difference in the world. And of course, I'm also the editor of the magazine for We, Trends at trends.we.net. Our most recent issue is the March issue. The next issue will be out in June. And tonight is a special night, but because of everything that's going on in the world, the challenges, the struggles, the recent tragedies, which is why I'm so glad our guests tonight will be joining us. And our guests are Dr. Marty Casey, Jana Larsen, and Latina Berryhill, and Patrick Carolan. It is Latina's first time with us. She's a very critical part of the UnGUN Institute, founded by Dr. Marty. And of course, we have Jana, who's just such an important person within the We the World family. She's a coordinator of our economic justice campaign, as well as she does so much for us, human resources, administration, and can't thank you enough for all you do, Jana. And of course, Patrick Carolan, who's a very, very good friend of We. He is a contributor to Trends, a magazine, thoughtful magazines from a deeply thoughtful articles from a deeply spiritual perspective. And so we're always happy when he makes a contribution. It's always thoughtful, powerful articles, and he always has very, very wonderful, thoughtful things to say. So I want to start us off, a brief intro. Part of what we've recently been experiencing in the world there's so much going on that makes us kind of have to rethink and sort of reevaluate how we approach the world, our institutions, our belief systems, and how we cope with these issues. I'm thinking particularly of two recent events. In the last few weeks, we've heard about the Supreme Court ruling on women's rights, in this case, the right to choose. And it's not, and because that has broader implications for women. There's been an ongoing attack on women's rights, not just the right to choose, but women's rights in terms of violence towards women, rights within marriage, rights outside marriage, their freedoms, the very essence of being a person and having rights. And of course, the tragic events in Buffalo and California this past weekend. Once again, senseless killing, gun violence, a pure act of hate in Buffalo. And how do we begin to react and think about these things? How do we deal with them? We could, it's so easy to sort of just want to go and pull your blanket over your head and try to ignore it or be in despair. And the wonderful part about all of our guests is that they've struggled with this in many different ways, but the last thing they do is give up. The last thing they do is feel despair and step away. They're here to make a difference, to give their thoughts and ideas about how we can move forward. So I'd like to start with Dr. Marty Casey of the UnGUN Institute. Dr. Marty, thank you again for coming on today.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here on the platform, and sending out love to Rick Ulfig as well. So what question do you have for me to start?
Well, my question is, from your perspective, how do we respond to these kind of events? Because in a sense, at least from my perspective, the issues with women the gun violence strikes at the very essence of who we are, the very essence of the rights of people, the very right to be, a complete disregard of life on many levels. So given the very important, wonderful work you've done in the UnGUN Institute on gun violence, but ultimately about the dignity of people, which I think is at the core of a lot of the issues we're facing. How do you respond? How do we deal with this as humans, as a society, to these kind of events?
Well, first of all, Robert, let me say that your question is truly, truly to the extreme right now. I mean, you want me to jump into the deep, not even put a toe in and go in shallow water first and make my way out to the waters. You want me to jump right in. So with that, I'm going to place on this life jacket and I'm gonna jump right into the deep with you. And so what I'm going to do to answer this, I want to first let our viewers know that these are just my opinions. But one thing that I can say, I sit here today as an expert of being a woman, and I am an expert of being Black. So being a Black woman and understanding these attacks that are around us and how they may even connect, I look at the root cause of anything. And the root cause is that if we have a hidden agenda or a planned attack on diminishing the Black culture and specifically Black men, the first thing that you want to do is take away any support that they may have across the nation. And the biggest support that I would say that Black men would have, it would be coming from another group of individuals who also had to fight for their rights, which is women. So it is not surprising to me that at this particular time, we are fighting from two different perspectives. But when we really dig deep and we look at what the overarching situation is, it really is, in my opinion, is to kill off the race of Black people in the United States, because it is posing a threat to some cultures, to some groups of individuals. There are some individuals in this nation that cannot picture unity on earth. They cannot picture peace in this world. They cannot picture any other culture that does not look like them being out front or at least equal to the same footing of what they have had and has been handed to them. Imagine everything that we had at one time was completely taken away from us. We were removed from the very place in which we were born and to be. And we was everything stripped of everything and came to a place, and yet we survived. Perseverance, we survived. So it goes without saying, we are truly a culture that can survive and persevere, and that opposes a threat if in fact the agenda is to do the opposite of what you see us doing. You don't want there, and when I say you, there are individuals obviously that feel threatened by, if the Black culture continues to rise above and to get stronger and to unite. Because let's talk about that. We were divided. You had to divide us amongst each other, even from lighter skin to darker skin African Americans, right? So that divide happened. And so now you continue, now you divide that pie, you slice it in half. Now you want to slice the halves. So we now have to remove women from even being a voice for the Black culture. And that is what we're looking at right now. So I'm gonna stop there to give someone else an opportunity to speak to this. But I believe that, again, these attacks are happening at the same time because the root cause is through the agenda of what the overall arching issue is. And that is to stop the Black culture and race from rising above all adversities and becoming equal footing to any other individual in America. That's just my simple opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Marty. Because from what you were saying, and I think really cut to the core issue of what we're dealing here in terms of both the history of the Black people in this country and their struggle to attain equality, to attain an equal footing, to just say, we're part of the we, as opposed to the division. So this, and the same thing with women too. I mean, you see throughout the history of the United States, and of course countries around the world, the attempt to diminish women having to struggle for the right to vote, for the simple right to even own property. So there was that, and of course, every time there was an assertion of those rights, as we saw in Reconstruction, there's an assertion of the rights, then there's an effort to put those rights down, and not just politically, with violence, with very severe violence, massacres, slaughters, people being lynched, women being attacked. So there's very much a resistance to the we, to the true we, and it's not just even they and us. There's a violence, there's a fear and a hatred, which of course there is no excuse for, but it's ever so present. And so we're trying to understand what could be, how do we move? I don't want to say beyond that, because it's a real struggle, it's real violence, it's real issues. We have to confront it and find ways to then, certain people may not come along. I think there's no way to force others, but how do we deal with that? And how do we deal with that in the day-to-day in our lives and dealing with people? Jana, Latina, Patrick, if either of you would care to jump in.
So I think there's a lot of things that we can do. The initial thing that comes to mind is we need people that are advocates for us, that have platforms like this. We need men that are advocates. We need other races. So when I think about women and what we have been completely stripped of, it's like we have truly taken so many steps back for not having the right to choose what happens to our own bodies. Someone else can dictate that is pretty appalling. And so how do we change it? Well, if we're allowing government to dictate how we, move forward with the things that we do with our bodies and just, the important rights that we should have, who's going to change that? Well, it goes back to what Dr. Marty just said. It's like we have taken so many steps back, and men, especially white men, have the authority, it seems like, right, and the power to make those changes and to be advocates for us as women and as our culture, being the Black culture. And so I think that when we talk more about it and we have people that speak up for us and advocate for us that look like people in the government, it helps.
Right. That's a very critical point. You really touched to the heart of it. And one of course, the tools that has been used to oppress people on a more subtle level are the economics. How we keep people down by basically preventing them from having opportunities,
Absolutely.
by having the resources and the tools to enable them to assert themselves and to have a certain standard of life. So, even though there are many aspects to this, one of the major aspects is economic justice. Jana, so I'd like you to jump in as our coordinator of economic justice issues for WE, if you could speak to that.
Well, it's a big subject, and it's certainly related to everything: disarmament, peace, unity, interdependence, health, environment, women, human rights. And I guess that was why it was a good fit for me, because as coordinator for WE, I've tried to build special projects that kind of take that all into account. And as a woman, it's just been plain alarming. And I can't imagine being a Black woman too on top of that. So I don't know the right words to say, but I admire any woman that comes forward and does anything, but especially in defense of your culture, your race, you know, your belief system is really something. And I, over the past 6 years, it's been really something to watch Trump in office. And I will probably say some things that are maybe I shouldn't say, but, and I know people have told me, oh, he's just a figurehead of this whole thing. And maybe that's true, but he definitely is, in my opinion, more than a figurehead, and has just brought all of these awful trends to come into play, and it's just so hard to keep yourself informed of what's going on at the same time that you want to just not pay any attention to it. But I mean, as for the issue of abortion, that's where I feel like I can say something, because I can't say what it's like to be a Black woman. I can say what it's like to be a mother, and I too have lost children, but not due to violence. And anytime a woman loses a child through whatever means, it's a horrible process, and you never really get over it. And so as far as the rights of women to be able to make their own decision about their bodies, between herself and her doctor, should be paramount. There should not be anyone coming in between in that equation of having to make that decision. It would be a hard decision for me to make that decision, but I would and I could, because I had a disabled child, and that's not easy. And if I knew I were to have a disabled child again, I would make that decision to terminate that pregnancy. If I were raped, I would not want to bring that pregnancy to fruition. If I were molested by a family member, I could not do that, especially in case of incest. I didn't have that, but I know of people who have. And I don't think anybody else should have the right to decide for me what I should go through to go through pregnancy. And it's not a piece of cake to go through pregnancy, and it's not a piece of cake to deliver a baby. And I mean, it's beyond what I can fathom. And I brought it up at the WE meeting the other day. We were talking about this, and years ago, well, not so long ago, the Handmaid's Tale was on, and I had a gruesome preoccupation with that, because I thought they did a really good job on presenting it. And I thought, how could that happen? How could that happen? And yet it looks like it's happening. It's just like with the Holocaust. How could we be aware, not like we are today with, you know, internet and everything, but how could we have let that happen, to have so many people killed simply because they were Jewish? And yet it seems like it's happening now. I'm just like speechless, because it just seems like what we have to have is just a whole lot of people getting together and saying no. But we're all saying no to the bad things, and yet here I am, I'm interviewing people to volunteer for us, and I'm just like giving my pep talk. Starts with one, it starts with one. And the people who make the effort to apply and then do the interview and everything, they're pretty much, they're there, but still it's just, I guess it's just life happens around you, and then you just have to think what's important. I have to do the daily stuff, and thinking about the big picture is like so hard, but that's what it's going to take, all of us making our efforts in our own little ways, which altogether will be big. And we just have to fight against it. We have to stand up. We have to say no. We just all have to come together. Be we.
So, Dr. Mark, you looked like you had your hand up for a second.
I did. I didn't want to interrupt, but I do want to just add to what the other speakers have stated. I am like all of us here. The action has to happen. We've spent so much time talking. We're not doing enough. We're just not doing enough. So if we were to break that down real quickly, who needs to do in order for something to happen quick? White men. Because if we were to follow the money right now, it's the white man that owns everything. That's just the bottom line. And I don't need to go through history to break that down, right? Let's just, I think by show of hands, we know white men own almost everything in America. So if we're following the money, the people that need to step out to do something right now, it's white men. And so the call to action, I asked all those who are associated with white men, who know white men, who are white men. I ask you the question right now: where are you? And where do you stand? And what will you do? Can we put that in the chat? Where are you? Where do you stand? And what will you do? Because I can sit here all day long, as well as Latina and Jana, and all of us we can talk about what is happening, but it looks like we're looking out the window, hollering and telling somebody, don't get hit by that bus, but we're hollering out the window. But if I really don't want that person to not get hit by that bus, I have to leave out my house and go and grab that person so they don't get hit by the bus. So I'm asking white men right now, where are you? Where do you stand? And what are you willing to do? Because it's on you right now. The other part of that is when we again, when you ask the question associating with what's happening with women's rights, as well as what's happening to the attacks of Black people and how the two of them come together. Again, I say that if they can stop a woman from being able to have rights over her own body, then they have stopped that woman from being able to speak up about anybody. You understand? Because if she can't choose, because this is not about her body, the physical body, as much as it is a lifestyle, a life change. When you have a baby, your whole life changes. Who you are, what you do, what you become, who you're responsible for, all of that takes place. And so it may not be as tragic as the events that Jana named of someone being molested or someone. It might just simply be a choice that right now I financially cannot afford to take care of a child and bring them into the world by myself because the father has decided to leave me high and dry. Is that not enough? Who am I to decide what another woman should do with her life? Who are we to decide that about anyone? And if, in fact, you can put your vote on, you want to weigh in on what a woman can do about her life, then surely you should be the first one to stand up and say, no one has the right to take the life of someone that doesn't look like you. You should be the first one with your vote on the table.
Well, we have an older looking white-haired gentleman right here amongst us, and who I imagine he must get this, that just looking at him, He's an older white-haired man who represents the power.
Well, I'd like to introduce Patrick Carolan at this moment. I think Patrick Carolan is truly an example of someone who has put himself on the line in fighting for justice and rights. He's been arrested untold times. He's put himself out there. He's written eloquently, but more than that, he's given his life and his body to fighting for justice and to fighting for, an equal society. He's taken active stance against the oppression of others, of all types, all groups, standing up for. So Patrick, I'd like you to kind of jump in here, tell us a little bit about some of the work you did. And also part of the reason why I wanted to have you here today, besides always loving talking to you and always loving hearing from you and always being in contact with you, as well as our other wonderful guests, is the thoughtfulness you've given us. How do we deal with these situations where there's clearly oppression, where certain groups, when you talk about the common good, too many people look at the terms common good in terms of their group. They don't really have that expansive vision that will allow them to do the things that Dr. Marty just challenged us to do, especially yourself and I, being, males with, light colored skin. So if you could just jump in a bit.
Sure. And thank you for that. So a couple things. I am a white man. I didn't realize I was older, but and I don't
Probably
really have,
older.
I don't really have much hair, so I'm not sure the white hair part of it. Although, there's an old saying that God only made a few perfect heads and the rest he put hair on. And so I fall under that category. Let me say it's been a tough couple of weeks for me because I have 4 children, 3 of whom are daughters. And so I think of what's been going on and how that relates to my daughters. And also 2 of my children are Black. I have 2 white children and 2 Black children. My wife and I were foster parents, and we adopted a biological brother and sister who were Black. And my son was shot several years ago. Thankfully, he survived, barely. He was shot. He was lying there bleeding. He lived in Savannah. He was lying there bleeding. His girlfriend was putting towels on him, trying to stop the bleeding. And the police started interrogating him and asking him if this was a drug deal gone bad. What gang were you part of? They wouldn't even allow the ambulance to come down the street to treat him. The ambulance driver finally got out of the ambulance and walked down the street so he could start treating my son. So, I do sort of understand it. I've actually written about it that I thought I understood racism until I became a father of Black children. And then I understood that I didn't really understand anything at all. But being a father, and I grew up in a very progressive family in a neighborhood that was racially mixed. I grew up in a neighborhood that was actually white, but then was being integrated. And I often tell a story of when a Black family moved into my street, and it was a poor Irish Catholic neighborhood. And my mother went down, knocked on the door, and introduced herself to the family, invited the mother of the family to come down and sit out on our front porch and have tea with her. Because my mother wanted all the other neighbors to see her welcoming this family into the neighborhood. Simple acts like that I think changed people. I wrote a piece just yesterday that hopefully can get published soon about the Catholic Bishop of Buffalo, who issued a statement right after the shooting in Buffalo about how horrendous this is and how we have to do everything we can to stop this gun violence that's going on. And what I wrote about was that he never once mentioned racism, didn't mention it at all in his statement about what happened there. Didn't talk about it, didn't say this is what's happening. This happened because of racism. His insinuation was that this is a lone shooter who mentally issues, and that's why the shooting happened. And we've allowed people too long to get away with that. It's one thing to say we got to stop the shooter. We have to stop the people who are the ones that are edging on the shooter, who are really pushing the shooter. And then the other thing I wanted to just point out is, I am a person of faith. I'm traditionally Catholic, mostly Franciscan. But I've come to understand that a great deal of our problem that we're dealing with is because of our theology. And just give you an example of that. We started out with a theology, particularly Christianity, but it's true of Muslim and Jewish to a certain extent. And we started out with this whole theology of dominionists. We had dominion over. And we evolved, about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we started thinking, well, it's not really dominion, that's not the right way to approach it. What we have is that we have to be good stewards over creation, but we still had that over part. And then, it's really easy to make that connection then, because then what we do is we look and we say, well, we have to be good stewards. So we have to be in control and be in charge of everything. And then what do we do is we define the we. Who is the we that we're talking about when we say we have to be good stewards? And, the we is male. We define that as male. And in Western culture, we define that as white men. And so we really need to just reimagine our entire theology and move away from the theology of stewardship. I define stewardship as nothing more than a dominionist with a conscience. So we have to get away from that concept of that we have stewardship over over all creation. Being Franciscan, I write a lot and talk a lot about what St. Francis of Assisi taught us is the whole concept of kinship with creation, with all of creation. So we're all one and all part of creation. So we need to rethink that. We need to, step aside for a second and just rethink our entire theology, because our whole theology is centered around separation, around individualism, around me getting to there, wherever the there is. And everything I do here is only important if it helps me get to there. And not about you and I connecting, not about, as St. Francis taught us, we're brothers and sisters. We're brothers and sisters with the birds and with the trees. We're all connected to each other. We're all part of the one. And until we move in that direction, we're never going to really change. I worked in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. Wonderful people there, good friends that, some of whom I spent time in jail with. And but I began to realize that everybody's working in their own little silos and everybody's working on their own little issues. And so, I'm working on immigration and this person's working on climate and this person's working on racism. And I began to understand that all of these things are they're not the issue. They're the result of the issue. The issue is we are not in right relationship with each other. We're not connected to each other. That's what the issue. And the result of that is we're living in this divided world. So I think we have to start doing that. And I appreciate both what you all said about white men. I have to say, I feel uncomfortable sometimes speaking out. But, I had a friend, a woman that I worked a lot with as a Black woman. I asked her about it one time. I said, I feel like, should I be the one speaking up? And her comment to me was, absolutely. She said, I am so tired of trying to explain to white people about racism. And I need people like you. We need people like you to be out there speaking out. You should be speaking out all the time. She said, I don't want to speak out anymore. I'm tired of it. I've been speaking out for 40 years now. So yes, you need to be speaking out there. So I try to speak out as much as I can and as often as I can on this issue, partly because I do have 2 children who are Black, but I would do it anyways, even if I didn't, because it's part of my faith. It's who I am as within my faith. And if we don't really come to look at it from that perspective, we're just going to never succeed. So I would, one of the things, because I do know a lot of white men who are afraid to speak out. And so, yes, it may be, Marty and Latina. One of the things that we could all start talking about is how do we get white men to speak out? How do we give them the permission to say, yes, we want you to speak out, because again, it comes to, there's another white man trying to tell Black women and women what they should think and what they should do and stuff like that. So I'm very cautious. I try to be cautious. And let me say,
We need white men. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to be
Yeah.
clear on this, Patrick. We need white men to call out other white men.
absolutely,
And
yes.
so we applaud you today, my goodness, for who you are and all that you are doing. We're clear on the 3 questions that I just asked. White men, where are you? I know where you are, Patrick. You're right here with me today. You're right here with us. You're right here in the we. And where do you stand? I know exactly where you stand, Patrick. It's clear to me. You've been standing here for a long time. You've proven that in so many ways, in your personal, your private, and your professional levels. You've shown that. And what will you do? You are already doing the work. So now what I need from you, if there's any other thing that you could do, that is call forth other white men who are also in that same space as you. Because again, it goes about following the money. And the way that we follow the money is that we count the numbers. Numbers matter. So if we have 1,000 people like Patrick standing over here on this side saying, hey, we're for Black people, we're for what's right, we're for unity, we're for peace. And we look over here and we have 2 people on that other side, then we realize that really we're winning.
Yeah.
And we will continue to fight, and we will fight by getting in good trouble, right? And that is, but when we can't identify who is who, it looks like we're fighting with a blindfold on. So what we need right now is a call to action for all white men like Robert and like Patrick to come together, stand together, so you can clearly stand on that mountaintop that Dr. King spoke about. He says he may not get there with us, but he knows
It's
it
going to be there. Yeah.
right? Well, you
Amen.
know where the mountaintop is because you get to go there all the time. It's us as Black people, we don't get to go. So go to the mountaintop and scream out, we are for all people. It's easy to say we, but if we doesn't include me, I don't see the we. I don't feel the we. I can't believe in the we. I said yes to coming on here last minute, Robert, when I got 1,000 things to do, because Robert, you were so gracious to invite me to a platform where I can be heard.
Yeah.
And however many places I can go to be heard, to save one, I know I've done what I can do. But Patrick and Robert, you have the opportunity to save many. I'm counting one by one. I count lives, I don't count deaths. And I'm counting one by one. But you have the opportunity, because see, I'm on a rowboat, you're on a yacht. That's the difference. Please go to the mountaintop and call up forth every white man like you. Tell them, come stand with you, come and do what you do. And let's count the numbers so we can follow the money and we can cover everybody and protect all to unite in this great United States of America.
So Marty, let me just say, Marty, my next article for Trend, which I just started to write, Robert, so you know, is all about my perspective as a white man on white privilege and how we have to speak out on that as white men. That's what my article is going to be about. So now you've given me.
You know what article I'm writing about? I'm writing something that called "What Color Do I Have to Be to Live?"
Great. Oh.
What color do I have to be to live? That's my article that's coming out.
So be in the same magazine, so it'll be good.
Yeah.
I'll send it over to Robert and see if he's willing to print it up.
Oh, Marty, I have heard your voice. I've seen your heart. We welcome it, because I think you all point out something very critical I've seen in my own life, that white males have to be willing to stand outside of what's comfortable. Just very briefly, without going too much into it, I came of age in the 70s where the most critical, important work was being done by the feminists. And I'm not just talking people who want to be the head of a corporation. The feminists are really struggling to change society. And it incorporated us having to then challenge each other, be willing to stand outside. I ran for a student assembly on a ticket where I was the only person of fair skin, to be told I'm a traitor to my people. And I was like, how can I be, I can't be a traitor to people who I don't believe in, who I don't feel, have any heart. So, but you have to be willing, and I think, Patrick, all of you here are willing to stand up and stand out. And I think that's especially critical for white men. We have to be willing to stand outside and take some chances, and be willing to have somebody turn against us, to have friends turn against us. I've voiced opinions where I've had friendships almost break up, but if those friends couldn't see or couldn't understand or didn't want to see, how could I call them a friend? So we have to be willing to challenge, willing to lose, because when we lose things like that, we really gain more, and we gain part of the community. And that's what I feel we have here. It's a community of truth. And because you're all speaking very heartfelt things and very truthful things. And times people aren't comfortable hearing those things, but they have to be heard. And that's what I'm seeing today. And I'm so grateful to all of you for saying these things.
Yeah, I'm scared to read the comments on Facebook. So you don't have to share them with me. I'm sure I'm not in the popular pool right now, but it's okay. You had me jump in the deep in the beginning, and I'm not going to swim backwards. I'm going to keep going.
Well, part of my
You just
feminist,
hit something, Robert.
yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say exactly what you just said is why many people don't speak out. It's because the fear of losing something or someone. And many times it's money. Many times it's power. When you speak against, I feel like them stripping rights, back to just women, them stripping rights was to silence us. For so many years, we've been having, silent cries. And now, because women are being heard and we've been given a voice, it's like, no, that's too much, ladies. Let's take it back, because we aren't all considered equal. No matter if we're, a different skin color or a different gender, they don't consider us all equal. And so back to the point of your question, Patrick, how do we? It's just as simple as fighting for equality, standing up saying we all are equal and we all deserve to be treated fairly and be treated the same as if we are truly equal.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that as a white male, we have to be willing to be vulnerable. That's a very difficult thing for men to, in particular, to be, but white men. But we have to be willing to say, yeah, you know what? I didn't understand. I thought I knew everything, but I didn't. And especially when it comes to issues of racism and sexism. I share a story about when I was 18, I went to work in a factory, and it was a great factory to work in, paid well. I was I know what I was going to do with my life. So, and I befriended a young Black guy who was also there. He's a few years older than me, way more experienced than I was, but he kind of took me under his wing a little bit. And we were talking and this is back in 1972, so shortly after the Civil Rights Movement. And we were talking one day about racism and things like that. White privilege wasn't really a term that was in use then. And I sort of argued with them and pushed back a little bit and said, well, we passed civil rights, what more do you want, kind of thing. And he said to me, so tomorrow, when you make your rounds, part of my job was to make a rounds to all the different parts of the factory and find out what orders were going to be shipped. He said, I want you to open your eyes and pay attention. And then when you come back, we'll have coffee and talk about it. So I walked around the factory the next day. I came back, I sat down. He said, did you notice anything? And I said, no, nothing out of the ordinary. He said, did you notice how many Black supervisors there were? And I thought about it and I said, well, there were no Black supervisors. And then I thought about that because when I was 6 years old, John Kennedy was running for president. And my father took me to see John Kennedy. And there was John Kennedy shaking hands. My father, deep Irish accent, came up to my father, shook hands with him, asked my father where he's from. And then he leaned down to me and he said, my ancestors came from Ireland. They had no money. And look, I'm growing up and I'm running for president now. So I thought, I could dream that I one day could be president, and this friend of mine couldn't even dream that one day he could be a floor supervisor in a factory. And that's when I really began to understand white privilege and what it meant. It doesn't take away from my success and everything I've done, but understanding that I got there, white privilege helped me get there and gave me a heads up, a step up in getting there is so critical to moving forward.
Can I ask you, Patrick, does
Yes.
having Black children or daughters, do you feel like that has changed your views on different
Oh,
things?
yes.
A lot of times, we don't necessarily fight for it, like, the Black crime, right?
Mhm.
Us being killed, we don't fight for it until it hits home.
Oh,
And
yeah.
home, then it changes, our point of view. And of course, not all of us, but I'm, just speaking.
Yeah. So just another little story about that. My son was when he was in, I think, 5th grade. He was home from school one day with a couple of his friends who were white. And a couple of his friends said to me, Mr. C, we know that when we're in class, we can fool around and your son will get blamed for it. And he was, I think, one of only one or two. There was 2 Black kids in his class. That was it. And I mean, it sort of hit me that, oh, yes, I would have, probably not picked that up in parent-teacher meetings. I would have thought this teacher was a, good person. This teacher would have thought he was a good person. He would have never in 1,000 years said that he was racist, but there he was, treating my son differently than he was treating the others. So I pick stuff like that up over and over and over again, being a father of Black children. I mean, people will say sometimes, your children were so lucky that, you adopted them. And I said, no, and my wife will say the same thing. We were the lucky ones. I mean, we certainly gave them a good life. We took care of them and they're wonderful. They're adults now, but we were the ones that were lucky. We learned as much from them as they learned from us.
That's beautiful.
Very beautiful. And I would have to just say, Patrick, that I don't know if that teacher did anything to treat your child differently. I believe the teacher was doing the norm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I didn't think
And
that was
there
the
lies
thing.
the problem.
Yeah,
There lies the problem. We have for years been doing things to oppress and to disregard and to hurt and harm a culture of people that have never had an opportunity to be loved on this soil.
Yeah, and the other thing that we do, though, and this gets back to what I said earlier about the bishop, is we sort of say, we look at these instances of shootings and what happened in Charleston with the white supremacists, and we say how terrible those people are, how horrible that is. We have to do something about those people, without understanding that just what you're saying, Marty, what they're talking about is just what the norm is. This is, everyday people they wouldn't in their mind visualize it as, I'm racist. And I'll give you an example of that. And not to pick on Bernie Sanders, but I'm going to pick on Bernie Sanders for a minute. So, and I think it was 2019, Stacey Abrams gave the State of the Union, the rebuttal to the State of the Union address. First time a Black woman gave a rebuttal to a State of the Union. Bernie Sanders decided he also needed to give a rebuttal. It wasn't good enough that Stacey Abrams, he had to give his own rebuttal to Donald Trump's. That was a white man using his white privilege. Instead of recognizing and honoring a Black woman for being the first one to give a rebuttal to a State of the Union and saying what a wonderful job she did and how I support all of this, he felt it necessary to give his own. And, Bernie Sanders, everybody would tell you, is just this wonderful progressive guy, believes in all these things. I've had a number of, particularly, it's Black women that have said to me, they understand, they know the real racist people and they know how to deal with them. It's the suburban progressive liberal people who don't really understand racism, but think they know everything about it. And again, that's where folks like Robert and myself have to really be the ones speaking out and saying, you don't get it. I know you're supportive, but you don't get it. You have to understand it to really be supportive.
I think it's also those that say they aren't racist and really feel they aren't. but there's something deeply rooted.
Yes.
And that's a big part of the beauty of UnGUN, where Dr. Casey has created this amazing program where, you know, she taps into the inner person, right?
Mhm.
To really ungun and deal with those deep-rooted things that come out, you know, unexpectedly when things happen. And so the beauty of being able to help someone and tap into those things prior to, so the preventative things that we do to help people so that we don't run into these issues when we have situations like what you just described. You know, being able to work with organizations like us, like UnGUN, really helps organizations, people, you know, worldwide face things before we have to deal with tragedy. So they know how to treat people and how to handle tragedies in a better way.
Thank you, Latina, for saying that. And that is truly the reason that UnGUN has been created, for those very reasons, because I recognize too many hurt people were hurting people, but we can also heal people. Healed people can heal people. World leaders can't change the world. They have to change themselves. That's where it begins. We're looking at the whole big picture. We're looking at a 5,000 piece puzzle, and we're trying to just automatically take 2 pieces and put them together, and all the 5,000 pieces click in. That's not the way it works. You have to take 1 piece at a time and find another piece that fits, and then find another piece, and you keep clicking them all together. And before you know, we put that 5,000 puzzle piece together. That's what we need to do, but you have to start with self. One, to UnGUN. Whosoever will today, whosoever will is willing to UnGUN themselves, so that inside your family, you're healing your family, and your family is being healed inside a community, and a community inside the nation, and the nation inside the world. Whosoever will, who's willing to start with self. And that is what we're dealing with today. And I think that was your last question, Robert, that you said you was going to ask us about how do we define the common good? You define the common good by finding the goodness in self. And what you find in self, you share that with others.
Yeah. Love.
And you also see, you don't see others. You see your brother or your sister. And so there's that, you know, we are not other, we are all one. We're all part of the one. We're all connected. I just finished reading a great book on finding the mother tree. I don't know if any of you have read that book. Just a fascinating book. It's about a woman who is she actually grew up in a forester family, cutting down trees. She became a scientist, and she discovered that trees are all connected to each other, and that trees, if there's a tree that's sick, that's not getting enough water, other trees will give that tree water. And
now,
that
if we want to say other trees, we get to say other people.
other people,
Okay,
yeah.
so we go, which one we doing?
Well,
Which one we doing?
Well, it's and again, it gets to the whole theological issue of who is the other versus who are brother and sister. So, we could get into a whole theology around this. And if you really, really, you know, read the theology of John Duns Scotus, who was a 13th century theologian and is a Franciscan theologian and philosopher, and he wrote a lot about that, the individualism and the connectiveness, and how we are all individuals, but we're also all connected.
Yes.
And I think, I mean, I'm going to wrap up here, but Patrick, I think this is a great note to end it on, because the little that I've read about trees is that, right, they are connected at the roots. So ultimately they are one, as ultimately we're one.
Yes.
Because if indeed the God or goddess, which I often like to say, it is within us, within each of us, we are the God, we are the goddess, we are truly one, we are connected. And not in the way New York Telephone is, but connected at a real spiritual, deep level. And maybe when people can begin to see that, it's a step forward.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That was, you know, the story of the finding the mother tree. She discovered from a scientific the connection, what spiritual people are discovering spiritually, and that, you know, and with the trees, a lot of it is with the mushrooms that connect everything, and, you know, and those links, it's just, and it's, I wrote to her, the author, and I said, I know you weren't meaning to write a spiritual book, you're writing a scientific book. What you actually wrote, though, was a spiritual book.
Mhm.
I love
It's
it.
the deep connection.
Patrick, I'm sorry I called you an old white man.
Oh, that's all right. Hi, Jana, I've been called an awful lot worse than that over the years. So. I'm pretty
Well-
thick-skinned about stuff like that.
That's what,
And,
that's what,
and I am an old white man, so.
I'm an old white lady, so
well, you know what I love about this? The 4 principles that UnGUN sits on is give, forgive, heal, and live. And I believe we touched on all 4 of those points today. Just you coming back, Jana, 20 minutes later to say, I'm sorry. But, you know, calling you this, it really shows you how we can continue to grow and connect by, you know, doing those 4 things first, right? Give. Taking time out to give some knowledge, to give some love, to give ourselves a chance to do better and be better, to forgive if we know we have offended someone, our brothers, our sisters, or others, however we define it, and to be in a position to heal, right? That's where the healing begins, and to live our best life. That is what this is all about. Robert, you are amazing. Thank you. I hope you call me at the last minute again, because I'm telling you, this really felt good tonight.
Well, it's funny, I know, and I want to thank you all because this is a big question. I've been thinking about it. And, you know, it's just like, it was just that it's the kind of thing I wanted to share and open to, because I knew the kind of people that are here today are open. And it was a free discussion from the heart. And I can't
Right.
thank you all enough for being part of this.
Oh, thank you,
Thank
Rob. It
you
was
for
great.
giving the platform, Patrick and Jana. Thank you also for just the work that you both do. We appreciate it so much.
Thank
Absolutely.
you all. You're all wonderful. It's good to meet you, Latina. And I hope to see you again on this platform.
Absolutely,
Always
absolutely.
wonderful, always wonderful to have Dr. Marty. She's a joy, and just you bring, I mean, your words do bring joy to me. Jana, you too, with great love. Patrick, I can't say enough about all of you. I just want to thank you all for being here, for being part of this discussion, for challenging us, for making us not so much think, but to feel.
Mm,
And that's an amazing, it's an amazing gift that you've given us today.
wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.